Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're doing well wherever you are. I'm Guillaume Carlier, the Propel Head of Content and Innovation. Really happy to be here again with you for the last week of the Daily Talks. So it's been already 2 months. I'm sure you really know the Daily Talk well now, but just for the new joiners for the last week, Daily Talks are a format of 3 webinars which give the mics to the tech and innovation experts. 20 minutes to talk and give their expertise, and then 5, 10, 15 minutes Q&A session. When you take the control, bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A button where you can give all the questions and will be answered by the end of the session. Sorry. So today, I'm really happy to receive Neil Gemassmer, the VP of International at Yardi, and Richard Gerritsen, the Regional Director of Europe at Yardi. Hope you can hear me well, guys. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Graham. How are you?
Hi, Guillaume.
Perfect. Thank you very much for being with us today. I know today you're going to talk about the disruption in real estate caused because of the COVID and the new urgency of the PropTech. Guys, the mic is yours.
Great. Thanks very much. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. Greetings from sunny Amsterdam, where we've been locked up for the last 2 months, so to say. Haven't been on an airplane for, just over 3 months, and largely due to COVID. And it's a fascinating time in Europe and on global real estate. And I wanted to introduce Richard Gerritsen, my colleague, and we want to have a little bit of a fireside chat in terms of some observations that we've seen in regards to the disruption that's happened in real estate, the different sectors, and then really importantly in terms of kind of the new pressure that's put on technology, and in particular how we see either an urgency defined as PropTech and or the additional observations from it. But Richard, perhaps a quick introduction of yourself, and in terms of how long have you been in real estate and what are some of your observations over the last 3 months?
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, my name is Richard Gerritsen. As a regional director now, I'm in my 15th year already. So I've seen the whole process, I would say, from an industry that in the mid 2000s was very almost averse or not very knowledgeable, not very focused on technology, and back then it was just called software, to now a situation where technology and PropTech plays a much more strategic role in a lot of businesses for real estate investment managers, property managers, investors, etc. So that's the first quick observation. Quickly about Yardi. Yardi is one of the largest, if not the largest technology organization that is fully focused on providing technology solutions to the real estate industry. Headquartered in Santa Barbara in the US, we followed a path of continuous growth, first within the US, but since 2000 also internationally, and definitely with a lot of focus on Europe. And from a product side, we started as maybe a traditional property management software and doing the lease management and the invoicing and the service charges, etc. But over the years, and especially in the last 10, 15 years, with a lot of focus on more front office technology, more front office deployment of technology, but also definitely with a focus to more external stakeholders like tenants, like vendors, like investors. So it is a strong vision that we want to have all the data and the functionality and the documents available in one platform and make them available to all these internal and external stakeholders.
Yeah, one of the things about real estate and the global economy is that it always changes, and we seem to go in these 7 or 10-year cycles, depending on what you see as a cycle. What's interesting to me, though, it seems like 10 years ago, we had the global financial crisis. So in 2008, 2009, 2010, where the global financial system was at a meltdown and there were millions of job losses. Real estate obviously went through a big bubble and then, kind of deflation of that in North America with housing. But is COVID different? Haven't we all gone through this before, and isn't it the same? Or what are your observations in terms of how COVID-19 is just perhaps different from what the GFC was?
It's, there definitely are parallels. It is, and it's maybe too early to say because we're still in the middle of the COVID crisis. But I think an important observation is that, everyone hit the brake for a moment. But I think much quicker than with the great financial crisis in 2009. Things starts to pick up. I only saw an article this morning where with the expectation that there's 4 billion of potential deals in Germany alone already for commercial real estate and mainly offices. So where the financial crisis lasted a little bit longer, it seems that COVID doesn't have this longer term impact. Having said that, it is what I found interesting about that the financial crisis in 2009 is that there is a moment that it feels that the world falls apart, and there is no tomorrow. The very interesting observation back then was that we saw this new focus on technology. And the problem with GFC, of course, was that the real estate industry realized that there was a very strong focus on transactions, and there wasn't really a focus on the asset management side, and there wasn't really a focus on compliance and how to manage processes in general. And those are topics that easily, or that you need technology for to get that organized and to get that facilitated. So if we fast forward now to COVID, I would say that, or at least our expectation is that there will be a surge, there will be a renewed focus on technology, not necessarily with the aim to improve compliance, but there will be other topics that are important and that will be important in the next period, and that is the new normal and new reality of people working from home, not working from home, the way people entertain, the way people have their consume. So where do they buy, and that will also have an effect on how they will live. So and it is our expectation that technology will play a really big part in this whole transition of real estate.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the big difference too was that the last 3 months is that it wasn't your financial structure that discriminated in terms of whether you would pull through the GFC or not, but you were forced to shut down, right? I mean, governments forced, or the reality of the situation in governments forced things to close down. So overnight, the hospitality industry closed down. Overnight, the airline industry closed down. You had malls shut down. You had this global status or global action that people had to work from home and could not leave their houses in many parts of the world. And that almost put everyone on equal footing for a period of time. And I think what's amazing to me is that, I mean, Yardi, as an example, with over 7,000 employees, is almost overnight, we had 98% of our employees work from home overnight. And I think a lot of organizations obviously had to do that. But what it did show that not all organizations could do that because of either the technologies layers that they relied on in terms of desktops in the office and not the ability to access systems that weren't in the cloud or were very kind of almost a mainframe type of basis. And they couldn't necessarily continue to service their customers or even pay bills because all of those functions were traditionally done in the office. So I think that's been one big observation in terms of how technology has changed communication.
Yeah.
And I think, prior to COVID, you would not have the world in all of these sessions in terms of just online and video conferences online, and people get used to in terms of what it means to do a high value transaction, online, where all of the parties are remote rather than the traditional means of sitting down, ironing out a contract, within a boardroom, et cetera. But Also interested to get your thoughts on, is there a part of Europe that you see that was harder hit, or in particular, maybe more so a sector that's harder hit, or was something more resilient than others from a European point of view?
Yeah, it's from a sector perspective, I would say, you know, the obvious one is retail, of course, and hospitality. So, and you already mentioned them. And I think that the more short-term effect are in these sectors because of the working from home and getting used to the new way of working from home, because you refer to the Yardi experience, and you know what? Moving in 1 week 7,000 people from a working from office situation to working from home, it actually went quite well. There were, you know, hardly any hiccups, and people function and people perform and people produce like they do in the office. So there is this new understanding, this new normal, that it is different. And it has pros and cons, but it definitely doesn't have a big effect on the level of services that we were able to provide and the way people worked and you know, and produced or were productive. So that's why I think that the more longer term effect will be in office, and maybe in parallel with that. I would say that it would be interesting to see what the residential sector will do, because the whole concept of working and co-working and living and co-living seems to be evolving as well. The first part of your questions was about countries or regions. It's quite interesting to see where I would say the Germany is still quite, I wouldn't say quiet, but it's a little bit more slowly starting up in comparison to other regions, which is interesting because Germany is considered as a country that was not as badly hit as others, but there is a surprising amount of activity at the moment for Yardi in countries like France and Switzerland. And I don't know France because it is obviously one of the countries that is hardest hit, but yeah, I guess it is the joy of being able to deal with actual French people in our Yardi organization, rather than dealing with Dutch or English people that might play a role in that. But it is, I would say, France and the UK are really regions that stand out when it comes to activity and focus on technology and PropTech.
Yeah, I think what from my observations too is that, you know, certain sectors within real estate that have clearly benefited is industrial. So demand for industrial has gone up, and that's directly linked to e-commerce. And of course, maybe unless you're doing automobile supply chain, then you're probably still stuck because all of those factories closed too. But certainly fast moving consumer goods have just gone, anyone attached to that type of last mile type of industrial platform has certainly done well. And there's just tremendous demand, and overall collection rates are high. Retail certainly has been hit hard in terms of overall owners and operators of shopping centers, and just big demands on not paying rent, or, you know, further reductions of rent and changes in terms of what the lease structures are. And what's interesting then is what's happening with the office environment and in co-working. So in both of those, there's a shock to the system in terms of, on one side you say the rapid uptake of flexible office space and co-working space, which traditionally was really just called business centers, in that anyone who is just monthly membership based, they were at high risk because those members have just canceled en masse, right? Because if you can't get to the office, why would I keep on paying for the membership? And so what we've seen around the world is that co-working platforms that were mainly membership based, a lot of them are closing down, because again, their occupancy rates have gone from 90% down to 10% because members are just closing down en masse. The interesting thing will be is that as offices open again, will corporate occupiers continue to have as many employees work out of the office, or do you think that they'll actually enable more of their employees to either work out of flex space or also out of home? There's just many industries that haven't had a history of allowing people to work remotely, and whether that's because of technology or it's because of trust issues or confidentiality issues, do you think that will change? And does that in turn maybe reduce the amount of office space that's required in key capital cities?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it will reduce, let's say, the square meters, but I am convinced that the usage itself will dramatically change because, to put it very black and white, you don't need an office space anymore to have a bunch of desks for people to do their work, because you have a similar desk that you can use to work at home, and that is something that we've learned. However, I'm convinced that the office itself has a very important role when it comes to identity, the corporate branding, the feeling of belonging, and the working together in projects, etc., etc. So the number of square meters might remain the same, but how an office is structured and how it is being used, I think, will dramatically change. Lots of meeting rooms, areas where you can, be creative alone or with a group of people, and so those will be areas that will be that you will see happening.
But no doubt then technology will need to be used differently in those environments too. So whether it's in terms of for the thermal cameras that gauge temperatures, I'm sure that will be much more common in office buildings, retail malls. And as an example, in Hong Kong, where I lived for a number of years, ever since SARS in the early 2000s, the Hong Kong airport, the Singapore airport, and many buildings actually had thermal cameras taking temperatures. They've been doing this for 15, 20 years. Mm-hmm. So I think that we'll see more of that. I think we'll also see more sensors in buildings and in office spaces to help determine what's the footfall within the office space, which desks are utilized, which are not utilized, and also then to a degree in terms of having better awareness in terms of who was on the floor at that point in time, so that if there is an outbreak of COVID-19 and or something similar, that you'll have much greater traceability. And so those are all neat areas in my mind in terms of what's happening in terms of the within the occupier space of additional technologies that are going to be introduced over time too.
Yeah, and I think that will be one of the most important drivers when you look at, we talked before about what the search for technology after the great financial crisis and the expected pickup in interest, but also in investment in technology, during COVID or directly after COVID. It will be censoring. It will be really, really understanding, not at tenant level, what. Yes, it is important if the lease is, if the rent is being paid, etc. But it is really important to understand how space is being used, by whom, etc., etc. Because only then you can evolve from an office operator that is in the business of providing space to something that an office operator that is in the business of providing services. Space as a service is a term not unknown in PropTech world, but that will really, I feel that this is really, when we look back in a couple of years, then this would be pinpointed as the starting point of really seeing this, tipping point in really having a focus and investment in it from the side of the landlord.
Yeah, I think another area of technology that commercial real estate will be able to learn or leverage is all of the advancements in the digitization within student accommodation and multifamily or build to rent. And that in both of these industries, there's rapid adoption of this concept that I can search online for a property, a building, a unit based on the area that I want to live in. I can apply online, I can rent amenities online. So whether that's I need furniture for my unit or whether I want another car park or whatever it may be, I need a bike rack, all the way through to executing a lease online in a digital format, making payments online, and then having the automated process of doing recurring payments online plus work orders and other things, and then renewals. And this seems to be, fairly robust on the residential side and the student side. On the co-working side, I think it has a long way to go because it's not fluid today. And on the commercial side, it's probably still most broken, right? So most commercial real estate is still let out of this traditional fashion of going on site and doing a viewing and then working with the contractor and signing leases and negotiating with lawyers. And I think that will be one area that the marketplace can really look at, is in terms of how do you digitize more of those processes, which will quicken transaction cycles, but it will also give everyone just so much more data that they can analyze to look at where there's improvement in the process too.
Yeah, absolutely, and I would urge all the people that are attending. It's don't only listen to old people like me, but also what I do is I talk a lot with my children, and your son is 18 as well, Neil. But it is very interesting to understand their expectation when it comes to being a consumer, and in this particular example, when it comes to what do they expect being a tenant, what do they expect from a landlord, etc. And it is all going through that device that we call the smartphone, but they do everything with that device except making phone calls. So the term, probably the name needs to change as well, because it is everything but a phone. But that device means that they expect that they are able, with that device, to go through a whole lease process, to order the amenities that they want, etc., etc. So it really becomes something very, very different. And there's a lot of self-service in there, and there's a lot of expectation in there that it can be done seamlessly, with a maximum of two pushes on a button, because otherwise it becomes too difficult or
untenable,
not intuitive enough.
So there's an interesting question in terms of, won't COVID drive the space, or won't the situation with COVID drive the need for more space, not less space? And maybe an example of that would be there's been these huge movements to open floor plans, and in terms of flexible working, in terms of where you work, where you sit, you really don't have a spot in the office that you go to. And on one side you could think, well, if we have to social distance also in the office, that why don't we just all go back to offices, like secluded offices, and kind of break down that notion that collaboration and open workforces, one, would be more productive because you could collaborate better, but two, also more productive in terms of an environment and being, employee friendly, and you take some of the hierarchy away. And I'm not sure if we'll ever go back to this idea of everyone having a corner office or wanting to have a corner office, because space is expensive. And I think that, if people went and had a reduced floor plate, or in terms of area per employee in an office environment, they're not going to be able to afford to take 50% more space in the city of London or in Singapore or wherever they may be, just because of the requirement too. I think they'll downsize the organization, but I think more importantly, they'll think more differently in terms of how those employees can work remotely or kind of in a hybrid environment too. I don't think that there's going to be a direct real-time demand on additional office space because of social distancing.
No, I fully agree with you. It is, but I do think that if there would be a KPI of usage per square meter, that will go dramatically up, because I do think also because the censoring, etc., becomes very, very affordable. So you can put that in place, but it will become a separate KPI to really look at the usage per square meter, how it is being used, why it is being used, etc. Only to to drive the benefit. Why do I rent? But also to drive let's say the satisfaction of the end users, that every square meter that you do lease, that it will be properly used and very intensively being used as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. So Yardi, we've been around for 40 years, and so some might look at the company as saying, well, but only PropTech companies innovate, and it's interesting that over the last 40 years, there's always been these innovation cycles, and real estate maybe to a degree has innovated in some minds less than other industries like banking and finance, but that's also largely because of the transaction volumes and the real-time type of trading of those assets and the standardization. What I find interesting is that the level of innovation, though, in real estate has gone through the roof over the last 5 years, and that's been driven by cloud-based systems. So the ability to have, you know, a programming and a storage area that is much less expensive than it used to be when you had to buy everything and all the computing power. You have distribution systems being online stores, i.e. Apple and Google, and you have the smartphone that is just heavily available and is primarily, as you were saying, is now a primary form of communication as well as analysis. A guide that I would kind of provide to many of the startups that we talk to, either through looking at acquisitions and or funding, would be is create value, not product. And so I think oftentimes it's easy to say, oh, I can create a better UI, I can create something that someone likes, but if there's no willingness to pay and there's no intrinsic value that is longer term, I think it's very tough for PropTechs and startups to avoid the ratio of 1 in 100 PropTechs or 1 in 100 startups survive. And that's a typical Silicon Valley type of a statistic, that the odds are against startups. But don't let that slow people down. But those that survive really create value somewhere and willingness to pay rather than just a product that looks nice. Do you have any other thoughts on that? Because I know that, you know, you talk to startups and PropTechs, and you've been involved in the European sector for so long.
It's no, I fully agree with you. It is, and let me refer back to, you know, to the younger generation. An app is only useful when it does something, and it is. My son is 16. The app may look nice, but if it's not intuitive and if it doesn't work, if it doesn't provide him the thing that he expects from it, then it will be deleted and it will never be looked at again. So the app needs to have a certain level of, you know, appeal, etc. But in the end, what it comes down to is that it has to work, and it has to work instantly. And this is not only for a 16-year-old that is, you know, next to downloading his 47,000 game on his phone, but also actually real stuff. But if you really push this further, technology becomes very much for consumers, for people that wants instant gratification from this app, and that is also in a professional role. Back in the 1980s, etc., it was okay if there was a, you know, software implemented that everyone went to a 1-week training to be able to do the work they are supposed to do.
Yeah.
My son and your son are not going through a 1-week training to be able to do what they want to do, not in a personal life, and definitely also not in their professional life.
So I think one of the things that both of us agree upon is what the last 3 months have certainly shown is that the need for technology just deep into the organization and the life cycle of real estate is in demand more so than ever. And the idea of having access to data to be able to make decisions through to just being able to understand which tenants are at risk, which tenants are not paying you, which covenants would that affect in terms of your loan obligations and others. And so I'd encourage companies to continue to innovate and look at the innovation cycles. But what speaks to me strongest is just the human spirit in terms of how strong it is, in terms of where there's a willingness to get through something there is, and how companies and individuals have come through this initial phase strong, and that this too will pass, and we need to look through you know, to the future and continue to stay focused and work together as individuals and through society. And I think that's something that's really taught us over the last 3 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, you know, after all the COVID is gone, there is still property, right? And that property will need to be managed, and that property will be part of a transaction. And if not today, then tomorrow, or else, you know, next month. So it will again be amazing to see how a lot of creativity and entrepreneurship will lead to new things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great how what MIPIM has done as a result, and traditionally everyone looks forward to that second week of March because it's cold and rainy in London and in Amsterdam, and everyone wants to get down to the south of France, where 9 out of 10 years it's nice and 1 or 2 years it rains. But I think in terms of how MIPIM has been able to refocus its audience and help collaborate and share knowledge on these type of sessions has just been wonderful too. So yeah, big thanks to the MIPIM ground or MIPIM team in Paris and worldwide for helping to lead these sessions too.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Are we at the
We
end
can
of
keep
our time?
talking. We can keep on going
Yeah,
for
what Guillaume
hours,
doesn't
right?
know is
So
that
he doesn't
No,
know
no,
us.
really.
He doesn't know us as well as he maybe thinks. So,
No, perfect
yeah, you
time,
said we had
perfect time for
5 hours
questions.
to talk, right? So this was just the warm up. There's a few more courses so to go.
No, let's go back to let's go to the question. Yeah, there is already five questions.
Yeah, so some of these I think we already discussed. So in terms of Audrey, thanks for submitting your questions in regards to what kind of changes do we see in the real estate industry over the next few years, and I think that some of the topics we talked about in terms of how much space does a corporate need to manage its workforce, and what are the expectations of employees. I think that will continue to evolve, but I think one takeaway for me and what we see with both the owners and the operators that certainly use our platform is that there'll be a less requirement for traditional office space, and it'll be used in different ways. I think flexible space and the ability for a large corporate occupier to flex up and down, and whether that's in their own provided flex space and or by a third party like a WeWork or an IWG, i.e. Regis, or any of the other number of companies, I think that will continue to be a really solid industry and will continue to innovate rapidly. But I think the business model will move to more longer-term memberships rather than short-term memberships, and I think that's what one could see in terms of what the shakeout is. And it's always been questioned in terms of with all the obligations that these co-working facilities are taking or these firms are taking. If the market goes south, will they be able to survive? And I think we've seen a big shakeout there. And then I would say on the value of PropTechs. It is just a constant innovation stream. And for those, again, who are entrepreneurs and who are raising capital, and for those who are providing capital, and also to those organizations that are utilizing these platforms, is make sure that it adds value to your organization. And as we spoke, and that there's a revenue model that is sustainable for both sides, right? Because the freemium model is nice and it allows you to build up a client base, but at some point in time you have to pay the bills and to grow. And so I think that's an important statement too. Guillaume, do you feel that we're missing any questions? I'm just going through the question list too.
Yeah. On the chat, maybe we can conclude with this question from Suzanne. How do you see the challenges for elevator usage in high-rise buildings?
Well, I guess one of those questions would be is in terms of when during the initial phases of COVID and as people started talking about using elevators again, there was your traditional elevator that might be able to fit 20 people, you could fit 3, and so you'd have a 3-hour long queue trying to get up to the 18th floor as an example. So I think a lot of organizations or buildings and the mechanical side of buildings that don't yet have more intelligent elevators or people transportation system in and out of buildings, that will be a big focus. And I think that's an important area that companies will focus on. So kind of taking the traditional elevator away by which, you get into the elevator and everyone pushes the buttons, to the more automated way by in the lobby, one pushes which elevator or which floor you need to go to, and then a certain elevator in the row will be able to algorithmically, locate enough people who need to go up, and so you have some sharing of data on that side too.
Yeah, and it is. I can make a comparison with the train or any form of public transport. It is, you cannot change the size of the train, and you cannot change the size of the elevator. So I guess there will be some rules, like, for example, wearing a face mask in an elevator. But in the end, it is a problem that can't be solved from the perspective that people need to use transportation to their workplace, as well as they need the elevator to get to their workplace as well. To avoid these long lines, if it takes 3 hours to finally get to the 18th floor, then and you still don't feel like being the sporty type and walk up the stairs, it means it's yet another reason to be flexible when it comes to how to use the office and when. It is, not everyone comes in 5 minutes to 9 in order to be to start working at 9 o'clock sharp, but people might be starting earlier. People might be starting later, or, hey, guess what? I'm working from home today.
But it's probably safe to say that tall buildings are not going to go away in city centers, and the simple economic reason is that space is of such value. You're not going to have Manhattan or Frankfurt or the city of London or La Défense in Paris go to low-rise buildings. You'll always have high rises in order to meet the demands of real estate. I think what will be really interesting though too is the continued knock-on effect of e-commerce and how retail, this is just another great example of how retail needs to change and really think about the services that they're providing to the demographics around each retail center and what drives traffic into them, and having a model by which it can coexist with e-commerce in terms of meeting the needs of the different tenants and the demographics are there. And the retail malls that have survived better than others are those that are traditional grocery store anchored retail malls, because those shops have stayed open. All of the facilities that have gone to, without that large anchor that is food related, necessity related, they've all suffered much more.
Thank you very much for all these answers, for your time today. And that was great pleasure to have you start this last week of the daily talks. Thank you very much, guys. And again, maybe if you can share the solution to join you. Sorry, if there is any other questions, any emails or a website we can find the informations on the.
Yeah, the easiest website is is www.yardi, which is YARDI.com. So we look forward to, and then there's a variety of local regional websites and global offices. So again, we've got 7,000 employees and we operate across 80 plus countries and 48 offices. So we're really a global company, but our focus is local. And we just recently opened up an office in Paris as well, which we're super excited about, and continuing to grow the team there. But I wanted to thank everyone who attended today for attending and some of the questions. And Guillaume, to you and the MIPIM team, thanks so much for putting on these great events.
Thank you very much, guys. Have a good day and see you next time in maybe in Propel by MIPIM Paris.
Sounds great. All righty. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.